Hello, my name is Tracy Ring. I am delighted to kick off an exciting panel talking about the challenges of women in data science during a global reset. And we're here to tackle some of what I think are some of the most exciting topics with some of the most esteemed colleagues. So I'm going to start and do a little bit of introductions, and then we're going to jump into some of the most compelling areas that data, AI, and machine learning are really shape-changing the world. I'm going to start with Deborah Leff. She's the CTO and global leader of AI and data science at IBM. Dr. Debbie Beardabishis, she's a physicist and famous for translating complex data ideas to explain data science behind everyday events. And Dr. Deepa Devkar, she's a vice president of data science and engineering at CNN Digital. She's really working to leverage data and understand their audience through all their digital platforms. And with that esteemed group of women, I'd love to just go ahead and get started with Debbie. As someone who's really been notorious through their career, shall we say, making waves, your research around acoustics at Columbia and NYU, one of the strategic goals of the World Women Foundation is to reduce inequality. It can obviously quite broad and difficult, but your work, can you share some ways that technology and science are uncovering inequality and solving for it?
Thank you, Tracy. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. First of all, we have to realize that data is everywhere. There's a statistic that's quite staggering, and that is the fact that 90% of the data that we're using today has been collected in only the past 2 years. I mean, just think about that. So we're inundated with data. We're all used to using data-powered devices, data-powered apps like Yelp and Google Maps and Uber and all kinds of data-powered apps. However, that so-called digital literacy doesn't always translate into data literacy. That is, very few of us stop to think about what the algorithm is doing, what the assumptions of the model behind the algorithm are, and if there are any biases. So now it's everyone's responsibility to be critical thinkers and to really determine if the insights that are being thrown at us are actually true or not. Just right now with COVID, for example, we are thrown data statistics all the time, right? We talk about cases, active cases, death rates, ICU beds per 1,000, etc. And if anything, this pandemic has shown us how important it is to be able to judge and interpret data insights correctly. So talking about bias specifically, we know that, for example, we know that all the algorithms that we make will reflect the culture with which we design them. And so, for example, there was a very famous case of an algorithm that was designed to predict who will commit crimes with more probability. And unfortunately, the algorithm was heavily biased towards a specific group, African Americans. The reason this happened is that to train this algorithm, they fed it historical data. And if you think about it, historically, we do see the police has mishandled and misrepresented in many different ways the cases for when crimes are committed. And so historically, the data did have a bias. So if we repeat that, if we train our algorithms with that, then we can only repeat the biases that we have today. Other examples are when the airbags were designed, for example, for to prevent deaths and injuries during car crashes. And unfortunately, the team did not have any women. And so the airbags were designed with size and everything of men, of quite, large white men. And so there was a law that passed quickly after, because so many women were disproportionately injured by airbags, because their necks, the consistency of their necks and their sizes were so different. And it was just causing injuries for them, and suffocation and whatnot. And so it showed how if you design technology with only a narrow set of the population in mind, you will not serve the diverse world that we live in today. Other examples are when Google, this was a horrible faux pas, but in 2015, Google was infamous for its software recognizing photos of Black people, and instead of recognizing the face and giving it a name such as a person in the kitchen or a graduation, it said gorillas. And so the way they solved that, it was really an appalling mistake, and they apologized for it, but the way they solved it is simply by eliminating the words gorilla and chimpanzee and so on from their data set for the tags. And so it wasn't really like a deep dive into how do we change this technology. Another embarrassing mistake, and I'll stop with this one, is—
Oh, please tell me will you share the one that we talked about, Debbie, the soap dispenser?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
we're all washing our hands so much now. You told me this story and I was astonished.
There's a video going around. Everyone can Google it. It's a YouTube video where you see, there's several actually, a white person putting their hands under the soap dispenser at an airport, and the soap quickly realizes there's a hand there with the signal, the light, and it dispenses soap. Then comes a Black person, puts their hand underneath it, and no soap is dispensed. Why? Because it's been calibrated for the amount of reflection that a typically white hand would give back, and not a Black hand, which absorbs more of the light. And so there are all these things that people are realizing, that algorithms are biased. I love what my friend Kathy O'Neill, who wrote the book, Weapons of Math Destruction, I love what she says. Just because it's math doesn't mean it's unbiased. It doesn't mean it's perfect. And so—
really powerful, really powerful.
And there's a big push right now for ethics in data science, in AI. And I think it's everyone's responsibility to become data literate to a certain extent, so that at least we can read charts on TV and things that marketing is throwing at us, or governments, to be able to judge whether what we're seeing is actually true or not.
Wow, I absolutely love that idea of data literacy and the importance of that. Deepa, you and I, we talked a good bit, obviously you've been really open about your transition from academia moving into industry, and with the overall media world being really at the helm of leveraging innovation, being on the digital edge. How are you seeing academia focusing on equality, and even highlighting how we can think about, in a changing world, educational sustainability?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. And, the education industry has been scrutinized for increasing their tuition and, at a staggering rate in the last 40 years. In fact, it's 1,400% increase in tuition in the last 40 years, which translates to about 3 times increase, which is 3 times higher than inflation. And unfortunately, the income for college graduates just does not match that, right? We know that. So this question is really interesting. It's been under scrutiny for a long time, but now with COVID, it's become even more front and center, right? Because now, especially for higher education, parents are, sort of viewing their adult kids at home and watching their Zoom classes and realizing, am I paying $100,000 for this, really? So, the question really becomes, as you pointed out, like, is this industry sustainable in the current state that it is? And I think it's really, COVID in a lot of cases is an accelerant to things that already were going to change. And so I think it's a perfect time for technology and innovation to disrupt the education market, because there are these top tier institutions, and actually, I like to quote Scott Galloway, who is a professor at NYU Stern Business School of Business, and he just did a recent interview on one of the CNN's town hall, actually, and said made some provocative predictions about how this industry is going to get disrupted. And the premise behind all of this is what I mentioned. Education tuition is increasing at a staggering rate. The college graduates are not making as much money as they should. It's not matching anymore. So we're increasing debt. And so, not to mention that, related to everything that Debbie just said, it's actually causing more inequality in how many people can earn that kind of an education, right? So I think with remote learning, we're all sort of in this major experiment right now, where remote learning has become widely accepted. Or we're at least dealing with it, right? And especially when it comes to higher education, people are really going to start to wonder. Coursera has been doing this since 2012, and many companies have since popped up in the market, like Udacity and Udemy. And especially for the tech industry, I think it's going to become more and more common, because while online classes typically have the same educational value for technology industries, at least, as being in person, people are going to start to rethink, is this whole college experience worth $100,000? So while some of these ideas that Scott talked about might be provocative, I think I agree with the notion that technology and innovation are going to cause a major disruption in the education industry. So one way this disruption might fold out is tech giants or FANG companies, suddenly pairing up with institutions like Harvard or Stanford, and making more and more online degrees available for students. There might even be a hybrid model where, there is remote learning, but then also the option in a post-COVID world. I like to be optimistic, hopefully that exists. Going back to when students are back on campus, providing a hybrid model of online and in-person degrees, and people can choose. But having that option just suddenly opens up so many opportunities for students across the globe, right? So now there's no geographical barrier, there's no visa limitations to getting good, high quality education. I think it also injects more competition in the system, which is also necessary. So I think it's actually, we're moving in the right direction. If anything, COVID is accelerating that.
Wow, Deepna, I really love your sort of position of hope around the sustainable education world. I think that's very, very exciting. And you said the word tech giant, so I think it's time to pivot to Deborah Leff from one of our great tech giants, IBM. One of your biggest mantras is really about getting beyond the buzzwords, becoming actionable. Deepna and Debbie both talked about some ways that we're really seeing the realness of technology. Thinking about equality, we've all, I touched a bit around unconscious bias. How do you see we can leverage big data or artificial intelligence as a method to overcome human bias?
Great question. And there's so much great information that Debbie B and that Deepna shared that we can really build on. And I want to start with, I think the journey to really become proficient in AI, especially for corporations and businesses, is really quite a maturity curve. And as data started to explode with all of our connected devices and social media and just even our online presence, companies began really experimenting with what they can do with that data. And this was going back, 10, 15 years. But the shift into machine learning, we really didn't see that start happening until, 5, 6 years ago. Maybe it was very aspirational for businesses, mostly in academia. And it took the explosion of data together with the maturity of cloud computing, with the elasticity and the compute power that offered companies, just really opened the door to kind of pull us out of the last AI winter and really opened the door to all of this incredible innovation. And now when you think about business leaders and you think about what data scientists do, there's a pretty big gap in that. Math is, it's highly complex, and it's magical in what these our unicorn data scientists can do. But for a business leader, it's very complex, and in some cases it's very daunting in terms of what they can do. So I think in the very early stages of watching kind of the dawn of this new era, we saw a lot of companies go out and hire data scientists and ask them to go off and do the data science-y things, expecting magical insights. We're going to come back to them and change their world and help them leapfrog and do these incredible, incredible things. And certainly there were some early successes. Certainly within experimentation, it's actually, it's almost surprisingly easy to have things work in experiments, and it's just incredibly devilishly deceiving, because in putting those into operation and production is actually really hard. But it took companies a bit of trying before that reality kind of, hit them in the face, so to speak. It was very awakening.
Figured it out, right? Like, so if we're moving away from experiments, what's the secret sauce? What does it take to be successful in AI?
So that's back to what you opened your question with, is it's about being outcome driven. It's not about taking a pile of data and saying, let's see what we can find. Now, there are research projects that are very valuable, and I never want to discount the fact that research projects are good. But a lot of research projects that start as research projects will end as research projects. If you are trying to put your data to work and to put insights to work, you have to start with what is the outcome that you're trying to drive, or the experience you're trying to change. Because when you think of it all the way through to the end of where the impact of that model will be felt and experienced, you actually architect it in a way that it actually can get into production one day. Companies have legacy systems, sometimes that have been built over the last 10 or 15 years. You cannot take, AI models and sprinkle them around an organization as if they're pixie dust and suddenly everything works. Sometimes it means massive transformation in order to rebuild systems using modern, techniques, microservices, in order to be able to kind of assemble things together and actually re-engineer them. And so if you don't think it through to the outcome you're trying to drive, you may find the insights, but then find yourself not actually being able to have those insights work in real time in the way that you actually intended. So it's really becoming outcome driven that is the key to really being successful with actually putting your machine learning models to work successfully. And then let me go back to the bias question, because when we started this journey, oh my God, we now have all this data. We're going to be able to find insights we can't see with the human eyes that we couldn't possibly know exist. Awesome, so exciting. Let's get started. People had very high expectations, and there's been some companies on the forefront that have done amazing things. Our digital natives have set the bar really high in terms of the things that companies could do. Everyone wanted on that bandwagon. Didn't quite know how to get on that bandwagon other than, hey, let's just get started. And now the reality set in of, okay, wait, we need to really think through the entire life cycle, from the way we access our data, because companies have tons of data, but it's still incredibly siloed and duplicated, and it's not clean, and it's not in a format. So there's a huge journey to just get data correct, and then thinking through all the way to point of impact where you'll be implementing it. And except for regulated companies who have dealt with bias in models from the very beginning, most companies don't realize that their models can capture bias, because you think about math as being an unbiased, it's numbers, it can't possibly be biased. But the way these models learn is it's by experience. I work with an education group for young women, for high school girls. And I have a video that I share with them that I found on YouTube. I can't remember who published it, but it's an amazing video. And it shows them how robots learn. And it starts with the example of the sun rises and then it sets. And the robot doesn't know, is the sun coming back up the next day? So how does it learn? It observes. Well, the next day the sun comes back up. So, oh, okay, well now 2 days in a row it came back up. Is it coming up tomorrow? Well, there's a probability it will, but it doesn't know certainly. And every day that it observes the sun going up and rising in the morning, it becomes more confident that that's what's going to happen. The robot has no idea of a solar system and a sun and an earth and an orbit, but it observes. So when, and just to go back to, like, I think there's a famous example of a company that had built a model to predict who they should hire to their engineering team. But the observation is the people they hired in the past were a lot of white men, you know, from Ivy League schools. And so the model learned that the best candidates are going to be white men from Ivy League schools, and completely built that model with all of that observed bias kind of built in. And so I think this is going to be a really big challenge, because as magical as the math is at finding things, it's the humans that have to question the results in order to be able to weed it out.
Wow, it's really, really fascinating. Debbie, I got to imagine that we pulled on some strings that are areas that you're passionate about. Anything to add?
I mean, I love hearing from Deborah's experience, because she actually works at a company that has one of the most famous AI machines, IBM Watson, and has garnered quite good results in healthcare and whatnot. And hearing about things that I see when I do training at different companies, that, you know, idealization of the data scientist that's going to magically come in and find the golden nuggets in the data at the right time, in the right context, right? It doesn't work that way.
We wish it did, but it doesn't quite.
Exactly.
Yeah, Deepna, anything to add? I mean, obviously CNN and in the broader group of media that they have influence on, you guys are at the forefront of some of this as well. Anything to add to what Debbie had talked about as far as overcoming bias and how you know, you see the broader world of media grappling with that?
Yeah. So when Deborah was talking about the part where, you know, a lot of the companies that are digitally native sort of embrace this and were the first ones to sort of get started in this, it resonated a lot with me, because I, you know, have been most of my data science career has been in media. And while those companies are not digitally native, they also got started, except that, you know, when Deborah was mentioning, you know, there's a lot of transformation to go through at the company before good quality work can happen, because the expectations are not set in the right place. You know, it's very insights and research driven, but it's titled and misnomered as machine learning and AI, and you know, it doesn't really work like that. So there's a lot of cultural catching up to do. And at CNN, you know, we are really trying to become a technology company. So while we have that linear TV brand that's very, very much popular, and that's what we're known for, the digital side is not as known for. And that is where my team comes in, and that is where we are really trying to make an impact by using machine learning and AI. So yeah, I totally agree. And especially the pain points that initially happen when you're starting these teams. Yeah, definitely. So
Yeah.
I have a lot to say about gender and the bias and inequality in hiring as well, but we'll get to that.
No, I think that's fascinating. I think I lead a group inside Deloitte that we have it as Women in Data and AI, and we originally started it as an opportunity to kind of engage with our clients, and it was amazing to see that inside, you know, where we typically do a lot of our data work, we literally had women sort of in every single role across the organization, from, you know, marketing roles and in other areas that were within sales, et cetera. And everybody raised their hand and had these exceptional stories about how, you know, maybe I'm an auditor, but I'm working with data as much as anyone else. And, you know, I'm using all of these same things and grappling with all of this. So it really is at the core. And I think that each of you has done a great job of talking about sort of the nuance, the complexity, and there is maybe not necessarily an automagic button, but I'm going to pivot just a little bit, if you don't mind, and talk about something that I think we're all hearing a ton about, and that's about being a resilient leader. and, you know, thinking about all these tough issues that we're solving, the value, the transformation that's going on, and some of the opportunities to really change the world in many ways. And so I'm curious, is you're engaging with your networks, whether it's, you know, students or media, boards of directors, how do you see the intentionality of reducing inequality across all of those conversations, those channels? Deborah, if I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind, and ask everybody to sort of weigh in, but how do you see resilience and inequality being linked?
So, you know, I think what's really interesting is that because there's really a light being shown on these topics right now, we're seeing a lot of statements of, you know, people making declarations of how they're going to handle equality and how they're going to handle diversity and inclusion. And I have to say, while that is really lovely to see, it's the action and it's how that translates that is more important than anything. And I know when we talked earlier, there was a story that I shared with you that I'd love to share with our audience today. And that is how IBM built a global team of over 100 data scientists that is 50% female, which is like an amazing accomplishment. And the thing that's so amazing about this accomplishment is that it was so purposeful. And it was led, this team is led by a gentleman named Seth Dobrin, Chief Data Officer at IBM. And he is an incredible supporter of women and women professionals and does a lot of mentoring and developing. And he knew he wanted to build a team that was balanced because he knew that he would get the best results from a balanced team, not just to check a box, but he actually really believes that the collaboration and the input across all genders, all nationalities, all places of origin would just make his team the better for it. And he found in the very beginning that he wasn't getting a lot of resumes from women. He was mostly getting resumes from male data scientists. And as much as he wanted to hire more women onto the team, he found that he just wasn't even getting the resumes. So how do you build a team when you're not even getting the interest? And he asked someone on the team, this woman that I work with, Susara, who's incredibly talented, and he asked her for her input. And she came back and she said, the problem you have is your job description, because men and women are naturally very different. And men are more prone to apply for jobs where they just qualify for a small percent of the job requirements. Women will apply for a job where they qualify for almost all of those job requirements. And there's many articles that are trying to convince women you do not have to qualify for 100% of the requirements in order to apply. Please apply. Please have the confidence to apply if you don't quite meet all of their criteria. And she encouraged him to actually rewrite the job description so that it was more tailored for more women to actually respond. And that was a pivotal moment in the way that he was building out that team, because that opened the door. And not just making the declaration that we'd like to have a more balanced team, but actually doing the work to maybe take the step back, get input from others to find out how he could change in order to hit the goal that he wanted. To me, that was one of the most inspiring stories that I've seen in a corporate setting of not just making the declaration, but actually being the leader and having the leadership to dive in and make sure you are doing all of the right things to drive the outcome that you've stated.
Yeah, I love that story so much. Deepna, you know, if we think about sort of winding the tape back a little bit further, do you see our education actually encouraging and providing data to actually change the world of talent and the way that people go about their career pursuits when they graduate? What's your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question related to this, right? Because first of all, Deborah, 50% is amazing. I really, really think that's amazing to achieve. So that's a hard outcome to get out of that. And I think the reason being is that there aren't 50% women in this industry, you know? So if every company tries to match that 50% ratio, it's going to be very hard to fulfill that, because there
talk about a scarcity of talent, right?
Yes, yeah. So to your point, it has to start at the education level. And I'm one of those, maybe this is a controversial point, but I'm one of those believers that I don't think we have to make the ratio balanced if it naturally doesn't occur. But I find it hard to believe that it doesn't naturally occur. I think it actually is that, you know, girls, as they're growing up, are not seeing enough examples of women who are in technology or women who are in data science and engineering, because in the past few decades, there aren't that many examples of that. So I think it really starts with that, you know, being engaged in high school, going to middle schools and actually talking about it, and have, you know, companies have these internship programs where they'll have recruiters or talent acquisition people. They'll go to these schools and, you know, talk about how they leverage technology and data science within their companies to get young minds excited about it. I think those faces could be and should be more women, so that, you know, we encourage other women that, you know, we don't just, there are people other than white men who are in this field, you know, so that they aspire and see them as role models and encourage that. So I think there's a huge factor in education. The other thing that sort of ties up my earlier point about, you know, education becoming more remote, I think, you know, oftentimes when we talk about diversity and inclusion and equality in our fields, it boils down to gender equality and gender diversity, whereas diversity is so much more, right? There are other types of diversity that we need to think about for being inclusive about, and other equalities that we need to think about. So I think remote learning will also open up the whole globe basically to acquiring talent. Even more companies, including my team, we're becoming completely remote and distributed, and we're completely agnostic to location. And I think that'll also help balance this, you know, because New York, which is where I'm based, it's a tough market, you know, so the little percentage of women or the little percentage of racial, you know, diversity that we look out for are just not that, it's very competitive to get to them, right? So I think opening it up and becoming more remote, including having education opportunities, even opening your doors to talent acquisition that are outside of your comfort zone, let's just say, or availability, ease of availability, will definitely help that situation as well. And, you know, coming back to what Deborah was saying too earlier, I think it needs to be outcome driven as well. Just like any project, any vision, anything that you do within your company, this too should be an OKR, where we don't just say, oh yes, this is something that we're focused on, this is something that we really want to do. We really have to tie objectives and key results around this so that we measure it every time. Every quarter we come back and say, okay, how far did we get in achieving this? I think that's how we move forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we've talked a lot about gender in this discussion, but Debbie, would you be willing, as a trailblazing one of the first Mexican PhDs that has been a huge changer? You know, you do something that I think is absolutely remarkable, and I think you talk about the concepts that we are talking about in a way that you know, you demystify it, and I think almost intrigue people to get involved in this area. You know, can you talk a little bit more about your work, not only around gender, but also around racial inequality?
Thank you for asking that question. I just want to backtrack for a second and tell Deborah that about her colleague. It's so nice to hear of men, especially going the extra mile to find female resumes in tech. But it's not only how they write the job description, it's where they post it and how they look for women, because there are companies like Power to Fly whose entire mission is dedicated to providing resumes of excellent women in tech and women in STEM to companies. And so, you know, it sometimes takes a little bit of crafting a strategy, not the usual strategy, but how to reach out to places where women are going to look at the job posting. And then going back to you, Tracy, I think, yes, I grew up in Mexico City, and I was part of a conservative community that discouraged women from pursuing a career in science. So when I told my mom in high school that I was interested in math and physics, she said, "Oh, don't tell that to the boys because they'll be intimidated and you won't be able to get married." Almost. But that kind of
Oh no!
I seeked out role models, which sometimes were obscure scientists like Tycho Brahe, this 16th century Danish astronomer. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be like him. And, you know, maybe I won't have any friends and I'll be locked up in some tower making observations, but at least I'll have science to keep me company. And so many years later, I kind of accidentally wrote an email to the person who had just won the Nobel Prize in Physics at Stanford, Steve Chu, who later became the Secretary of Energy. And I said, hey, I want to work with you. I have a scholarship from the Mexican government. And then my advisor in Mexico said, do you know who you just wrote to? And I was like, no, I didn't really pay attention to that. Anyways, he accepted me to work directly with him. And 6 years later, I was told that I became the first Mexican woman to get a PhD in physics from Stanford. And that is a great thing, but it's also a little sad because it showed me that with that privilege, I have a responsibility now to help a whole generation of girls who, like myself, feel attracted to science, technology, engineering, you know, but who for some reason, whether it be financial or social, feel that they cannot achieve their dreams. So I spend a lot of my time today creating workshops, mentoring young women, joining and creating initiatives to try to get them to succeed in STEM. And one thing that I'm critical of, that I think is important to say here, is that I see this huge effort with all these organizations trying to get young girls to learn how to code, as if coding is an end in itself. And so they're like, check, you know, they know how to manipulate a few symbols here and there, and they get an output. But we are forgetting that the real thing that they should be taught is that how to solve problems, how to think critically about the world, not just coding as if it's a language. I mean, I was taught English, not just to speak English, but to be able to comprehend and read and contribute to society. So I'm just gonna finish with an anecdote. When I visited a museum of science, I'm not gonna say which one, but in the afternoon they had a beautiful program for gifted high school girls that were learning how to code. You know, as everyone, as girls who code, or women who code, another check mark, and a huge donation of money was funding this program. And so I approached one team of the girls. There were 6 girls, very bright, and they knew how to use a database of turtles. So they were helping the turtle area in the museum, because they actually have live turtles, do some analysis. And so I went to the group and I asked them, oh, this column here, they were using SQL. And I said, this column here says weight, but it doesn't have any units. So the numbers are like 300 and 200. And so is this in pounds? Is it in kilograms? And, you know, they were quiet. And one of them raised her hand and she says, oh, I think it's in pounds. And I said, wait, but just a moment ago, you told me that the turtles, you've seen them, right? And that they fit the palm of your hand. So they're like really small. So wait, I weigh around 120, 130 pounds. You're telling me that this little thing weighs 3 times what I weigh. So that doesn't quite make sense. So, you know, they were quiet. And in the end, we had to call somebody from the museum. And, you know, we realized it was in grams, right? The weight was in grams. And so that showed me, I think it's a good analogy to show that, you know, they were incredibly bright and they were speedy coders and accurate, and they were working with this database for 4 months, but they hadn't really stopped to think. They weren't encouraged to think about what they were actually doing. These are real turtles that we need to take the data from to analyze and hopefully either give them a better environment or see how they grow faster. What's the goal? And I see that it wasn't the girl's fault. And I see that in adults as well, in companies, repeating the pattern of being great coders and great data scientists, but forgetting the why and the how of the company and the goals. So I think this is really important to fix when it comes to educating and advancing women in STEM.
Well,
Debbie, I've got enough.
If that is not the absolute answer of intentionality, of being in the moment and like taking a pause, I don't know what is. So that turtle story is just absolutely fantastic. I really, really, really love that. And since we're live, I'll put you on the spot a little bit, Debbie. I spent almost 3 years in Mexico City. And once we're able to travel again, I hope you and I can go to Mexico City together and do some more. It's one of my absolute most passionate things that I've had the opportunity to be a part of. So hopefully you'll take me up on that offer.
Happy.
In closing, each of you is what I call an absolute woman to watch. You know, individually, each of you are making huge contributions within the work that you're doing. My personal focus is really around building sustainable, mutually beneficial ecosystems and alliances in my work at Deloitte. And I'm really curious in the last few moments, if each of you can just take a minute and highlight what are the partnerships that you are personally fostering to help propel you and others to success and bring others along. So why don't we go ahead and Deborah Leff, why don't we start with you?
Okay, well, I feel like Debbie and I need to spend a lot more time together because Debbie, what you just talked about is what I want to talk about next. So I have a 15-year-old and I don't code. I wish I could code. I feel like hampered that I can't code. And I have tried since she could walk to try and get her interested in coding. And the second she figured out a game was just for the purpose of teaching her to code, she was like, haha, I'm on to you, no thank you. She was not interested in coding. She thought it was optional math homework that why would she sign up to do? That makes no sense. But yet I would come home and I would talk around the dinner table about some of the projects I'm involved in with clients and some of the ways that they're mining their data for insights to do something better or to help the world and she'd be fascinated by those stories. And after a while, as she entered high school, if you asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up, she would say, I want to be like you, Mom. And I'd be like, well, how are you going to get there? Where is the program for the girls that actually teaches them how to use technology to solve problems? And the thought originally was, well, we have a girls who code. We need a girls who don't code. We need something that's not for the coders, but it's going to be the future leaders that are going to help solve problems. And of course, we don't want to create an identity around not coding. So we created, my daughter and I together, a STEM education program for high school girls called Girls Who Solve. And we use each week, I know, we're going to have to talk after this. And anyone who's listening, if this is something you want to get involved in and build in your community, by all means, please connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a note, because what we've done is built a curriculum that essentially has 1-hour sessions that starts with introducing a problem to the girls and then giving them an exercise for them to solve it. And they have no idea that they're using data science. They have no idea that they're using machine learning because it's very practical. Hey, we have a problem. I'll give you an example. We introduce them to IoT devices by introducing them to a use case at Guiding Eyes for the Blind. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to maximize the donation dollars that they were receiving to train as many dogs as humanly possible, so that many dogs as humanly possible. The graduation and success rate was only about 40%. So if they could identify which dogs were likely to become successful, then they would actually be able to reallocate dollars, because it takes about 2 years to train a dog. They could reallocate those dollars and do more good in the world. And so what did they do? They actually partnered with IBM, who created an IoT device that measured biometric data and environmental data of the animals. And they found that when a stressor was introduced to the dog and the heart rate escalated, it was the rate and pace it returned to normal that became a very strong predictor of whether or not that dog was going to succeed. And so animals that didn't showcase those characteristics were adopted, sent to a police academy. They were sent someplace else, but not continue to be invested in for training. So each week we focus on a problem we're solving using technology they're familiar with, Spotify, Snapchat, their iPhone and facial recognition. And we teach them about the technology they use today and how it's used to solve a problem and get them thinking about solving problems. And we built the curriculum to be very open, that anyone could pick it up and make a club in their high school, and that it could be executed anywhere we want. So it's very open. But
Deborah, your email is gonna absolutely blow up. That is the coolest thing.
By the way, and the kids, every session, the kids walk out, all of it. That's so cool. That's so cool. And one of the women, I had a volunteer, data scientist from IBM, that came and volunteered with me. And she walked out and she said, "You have no idea what you're doing for these kids. I wasn't introduced to how cool technology was until I was well into college. But look at these kids. They're our digital natives. They use more AI than all of us combined. Like their lives are infused with AI and they don't even know it. But just by introducing it to them and how it's being used and why is game changing." And so to me, the best way to have more data scientists in the world is let's get more of our future leaders, whether they become data scientists or they become the CEOs and the executives and the vice presidents that know how to ask technology to solve problems for them. So anyway, I'm obviously very passionate about this.
That is amazing. I'm gonna leave your email box to blow up with many interested parties. Debbie, can you talk to me? Deborah Leff talked a little bit about science. Tell me about your passion project.
So right now, I'm very grateful to the Lyda Hill Philanthropies because they got together a program. So they selected 120 female scientists of all ages, all abilities, color, and countries and languages. It's just an incredible group. And it's called the AAAS, so American Association for the Advancement of Science, and it's called the If Then Initiative. And it's so wonderful. We got all together in Dallas, Texas for media training. And, and what we're doing is we're using the platform to each one of us create projects and collaborate to inspire middle school girls, because we believe that's the age at which they start to make decisions on whether they're gonna have the open and growth mindset of taking a risk and doing things that are not always comfortable, like science, or stay, unfortunately, with a fixed mindset and sort of stay with what they're comfortable, even if they're interested in something else. And so I'm writing a book right now for middle school girls called We Are Star Stuff. And it includes part of my story and anecdotes and how I view the world with my physics classes, because I get up and I ask questions about why things happen the way they do. And I would love to give that gift of curiosity to young girls.
Wonderful. And then Deepna, take us home and tell us about Chief.
Yeah. So I think this is fascinating. By the way, Deborah, I love the name Girls Who Solve. I think it's so creative because, as everybody mentioned here, you know, this technique has to develop early on. Otherwise, I too on my team see this all the time, where people just focus on, you know, like which algorithm they want to use and then figure out which data they need to do it, when it's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be problem solve oriented. Anyway, coming back to Chief. So I think this is also interesting. You know, I think you guys are handling it at the, you know, middle school level and even with the younger girls. I have recently partnered with an organization called Chief, which is VP levels and above, women only. And the whole objective of the organization is to basically put more women in leadership positions and doing it through the network. So I think, you know, this can happen at any level. It could happen in your local school. It could happen in your own company, where you seek women into these positions out of your network. Teach them how to start these things early on, give them better examples and role models to go follow. Chief does this at higher levels. So basically, because the belief is that the more women leaders that we have in organizations, the more encouraged they're going to feel, because maybe we don't have a men in leadership positions like the one you mentioned, Deborah, where they actually focus on these issues. So if women are in leadership positions, they're going to focus on these issues and actually drive more other women into the organization as well. So it's a fascinating organization. I'm a founding member. I definitely encourage women here to apply and seek it out as well.
Fantastic. Well, ladies, this has gone so fast. I think we could probably talk for hours, but in closing, I will say, within the World Women Summit's, strategic development goals, I can see you're all making waves, really making an impact. It's been an honor to talk. I appreciate everybody's ability to open it up and have folks reach out to them. I thank you so much for your time. I know this is just the beginning of an even more important conversation. So thank you so very much.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.